She wasn't supposed to knock on his door that night. She had her own apartment, her own couch, her own wine, her own carefully maintained life just 12 feet across the hallway. But at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, Emma Carter stood in that narrow corridor in a dress she'd worn to impress people she didn't even like, mascara tracking slow lines down both cheeks, and she knocked on Logan Brooks's door instead. She didn't know it then. Neither did he. But that knock, quiet, almost apologetic, was the beginning of the end of everything they'd been pretending not to feel. If this story already has you, hit that like button, leave your city in the comments, and let me see exactly how far this one travels. Now let's go back to where it really started. The thing about East Nashville was that it had a way of making you feel like you'd chosen something on purpose, even when you'd ended up there by accident. Logan Brooks had ended up there by accident. 2 years ago, he'd been living in a 2-bedroom apartment in Germantown with a woman named Rachel and a future that looked from the outside like it was going somewhere. Then Rachel left. Not dramatically, not with shouting or thrown objects, but quietly, the way some people leave when they've made a decision long before they say it out loud. She'd packed over 3 weekends while Logan was at work, and by the time he fully understood what was happening, the apartment had that specific hollow echo that belongs only to rooms recently emptied of someone else's life. The part that broke him wasn't the leaving, it was the timing. Mia was 14 months old. So Logan loaded what he could fit into a rented pickup, strapped his daughter into her car seat, and drove across the city to a building on Lillian Avenue where the rent was manageable and the landlord didn't ask too many questions. Apartment 4B, 3rd floor, east-facing windows that caught the morning light in a way that made even bad days feel slightly less impossible. He'd been there 2 years now. He wasn't going anywhere. Most mornings started the same. He'd wake at 6:15 before his alarm. His body had stopped trusting alarm clocks sometime in the first year of single parenthood. And shuffle into the kitchen to start coffee while Mia's voice drifted through the baby monitor in a half-asleep narration of whatever she'd been dreaming about. She was 3 now, which meant her dreams involved dinosaurs that wore hats, a dog she didn't own but spoke about as though she did, and sometimes her grandmother's garden, which she'd visited once and apparently filed away in permanent memory. "Daddy," she'd announce some mornings, materializing at the kitchen doorway in her fleece pajamas, hair catastrophic, a stuffed elephant dangling from one hand. "The dog needs breakfast." "We don't have a dog, Bug." "The other dog." He never won those arguments. Logan worked as a structural engineer for a mid-sized firm downtown. It was the kind of work that suited a certain kind of brain. Methodical, load-bearing, precise, and his brain had always worked that way, which Rachel had once called steadiness and later called rigidity, depending on her mood. He liked the work. He liked the logic of it, the way every number had to account for every other number, the way a building either stood or it didn't, and there was no gray area in between. He was less practiced at the emotional equivalent of that. His mother called every Sunday evening. His best friend from college, Derek, texted him memes at irregular hours and occasionally drove over with beer and the specific kind of company that requires nothing from you. He had people. He wasn't isolated. But the apartment at night, once Mia was down and the dishes were done, and the monitor was set to medium volume on the kitchen counter. That silence had its own weight to it. Not unbearable, just present. Emma Carter had moved into 4A 11 months ago. He'd met her in the hallway on her first day, when she was carrying an oversized photography bag in one arm and a floor lamp that was actively winning the fight against her in the other. He'd taken the lamp without asking, carried it inside, and set it in the corner she pointed to. She'd said thank you and offered him coffee from a pot she'd somehow already made despite being in the middle of moving. He'd said yes. They'd talked for 40 minutes in a half-unpacked living room surrounded by boxes, and had covered, in no particular order, the parking situation in the building, the best Thai place within walking distance, the nature of creative work versus stable work, and whether that distinction was as meaningful as people made it seem, and the specific kind of loneliness that comes from being in your early 30s and feeling like everyone around you is either ahead of schedule or behind it, and you can't quite tell which category you fall into. He'd gone home thinking she was interesting. 3 weeks later, she'd knocked on his door at 7 in the morning because Mia had somehow gotten out of the apartment. She hadn't. She'd been asleep in her room, but the door had been left slightly open. And Emma, just home from an early shoot, had seen the door and knocked in a panic. Logan had found this genuinely funny, which Emma had not initially appreciated but later admitted was a reasonable response. Mia had woken up during the commotion, wandered out in her pajamas, looked at Emma with the evaluating stare that 3-year-olds deploy without any social filter, and said, "You're pretty." Emma had laughed, a real laugh, the unself-conscious kind. And from that moment, something settled between the three of them that was hard to name but easy to feel. Over the following months, the friendship built itself the way real friendships do, through accumulated small moments rather than any single defining one. Emma, shooting a wedding on a Saturday and coming home to find a container of soup outside her door because Logan knew she forgot to eat on shoot days. Logan stuck with a work deadline and Mia restless, and Emma appearing at 5:30 to take the little girl to the park so he could finish. The two of them sitting on his kitchen floor at midnight eating leftover pizza because neither of them felt like being alone and neither of them said so directly, because that's how it worked between people who weren't quite saying things yet. Emma was good at her work in the specific way that people are good at things they actually love. She photographed weddings, mostly, with occasional editorial work that paid better but satisfied her less. Her photos had a quality that Logan, who knew nothing about photography, had once tried to articulate and landed on honest. They didn't make people look like the best version of themselves. They made people look like themselves. And somehow, that was better. She had regulars who requested her specifically and a growing reputation that was threatening to outgrow East Nashville's social circuit. She was also, for reasons that Logan tried not to examine too carefully, one of the most effortlessly compelling people he'd been around in a long time. Not in a performed way. Not in the way of someone who'd worked at being charming. Just, she said true things, and she said them without preamble, and she had a specific look she got when she was listening that made you feel like what you were saying actually mattered. He'd noticed all of this. He'd been very deliberate about not doing anything with it, because there was a list of reasons, and the list was long, and he'd reviewed it enough times to have it memorized. He was 32 and a single father and still figuring out what the next phase of his life looked like. She was his best friend in this building and possibly the person he trusted most in his daily life, and that was worth more than whatever temporary chaos feelings produced. He'd been wrong about a relationship before, badly wrong, in a way that had left permanent marks, and Mia had been the collateral of that wrongness. And he was not going to risk his daughter's stability chasing something that might not survive contact with reality. Also, and this was the part he turned over the most, late at night when the apartment was quiet, Emma had a whole separate world that Logan was only partially visible in. A family in Brentwood, well off and socially connected, who had opinions about her life that they expressed with the specific confidence of people who'd never been told their opinions were unwelcome. A mother who asked, with regularity, whether Emma had looked into certain men who had been identified as promising. A father who was proud of her work, but wished, in a gentle way he probably thought was invisible, that she'd chosen something more conventional. And circling at the edges of Emma's life, with increasing frequency in recent months, was a man named Grant Whitmore. Logan had heard about Grant the way you hear about weather, in increments, never quite directly. A charity gala, her mother had mentioned. A dinner that Emma had gone to and come home from looking like she'd been asked to perform a task she found exhausting. A second dinner. A third. The Whitmore family had money in the old Nashville sense, the kind that came with a last name that appeared on buildings and endowment plaques, and Grant had apparently inherited both the money and the assumption that these things entitled him to whatever he wanted. Emma never said she liked him. She also never said she didn't. She had on one occasion said he was fine in the specific tone of voice that Logan had learned to recognize as her diplomatic way of saying something was significantly worse than fine. He hadn't pushed. It wasn't his business. That was what he told himself, and most days he believed it. The Tuesday. It all changed started like most Tuesdays. Logan had taken Mia to her afternoon preschool program, come home, cleared a backlog of emails, run to the hardware store for a curtain rod that he kept putting off replacing, and started dinner. A pasta situation that Mia would eat if he made the sauce the right color red, which required a very specific tomato-to-carrot ratio that had taken him 2 months to calibrate. He picked her up at 4:30. They ate at 5:45. She had a bath. He read her 2 books, one of which she chose and one of which he chose, because he'd instituted this policy when he realized she would otherwise request the same 3 books in rotation for the rest of their natural lives. She was asleep by 7:30. Logan cleaned the kitchen, answered 2 more work emails, and sat on the couch with the specific intention of watching something unchallenging on television and being horizontal for a few hours. He made it 20 minutes into a documentary about bridge engineering, which was, he acknowledged, maybe a sign that he needed a hobby that wasn't work-adjacent, before his eyes started closing. He fell asleep on the couch somewhere around 9:30 with the TV still on. At 11:47, something knocked on his door. He came awake the way parents come awake. Instantly, completely, with the first assessment being Mia before anything else. He sat up, registered that the monitor was quiet, and then heard the knock again. Careful. Not urgent in the way of emergencies, but not casual either. He crossed the apartment in the dark, unlocked the door, and opened it. Emma was standing in the hallway in a black dress that he'd never seen before. The kind of dress that had clearly been chosen with deliberate care, now slightly defeated looking, the fabric wrinkled at the hem where she'd been sitting in it too long. She had a small clutch purse held in both hands, and her mascara had done something complicated around her eyes that told him she'd been crying not too long ago and had since run out of tears rather than actually stopped feeling whatever made them happen. She didn't say anything for a second. Neither did he. "I know it's late," she said finally. "It's fine." He stepped back from the door without having to think about it. "Come in." She came in. He closed the door. She stood in the middle of his living room for a moment. The TV was still on, quiet, casting low light. And he watched her do the thing she sometimes did when she was trying to figure out how to start a sentence, which was to press her lips together and look at a neutral point in the middle distance. "Rough night?" he said. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. "I look that bad?" "You look like someone who had a rough night." She sat down on his couch, which she did with the ease of someone who'd sat on it many times before, and set the small purse on the coffee table. She looked at her hands for a moment. "I was at dinner with Grant," she said. "His family. At their place in Forest Hills." A pause. 4 hours. Logan went to the kitchen and put the kettle on without asking whether she wanted tea, because she always wanted tea when she was like this, and she never remembered to ask for it. He could still hear her from the kitchen. It was one of those dinners where everything is very nice and very expensive and you're being evaluated the whole time, but no one acknowledges that's what's happening. Her voice had the flatness of exhaustion rather than effect. His mother asked me 3 times in 3 different ways what I planned to do about my career trajectory. Like photography was a phase I was going through. "What did you say?" I said it was going well and smiled. She said it in a way that conveyed exactly how much that smile had cost her. What I wanted to say was that my career trajectory was my own business, and she could go to hell, but 4 hours. He brought 2 mugs out and sat in the armchair across from her. She wrapped her hands around her mug. Mia's stuffed elephant was on the cushion beside her. Logan had been using it as a pillow, and Emma picked it up absently, turned it over in her hands. "He wasn't unkind," she said. "Grant. He's never unkind. He's very—" She searched. "He's very smooth, and everything he says sounds reasonable. He reframes things while you're watching him do it, and you end up wondering whether you misunderstood the original version." Logan looked at her. "What kind of reframing?" She was quiet for a moment. "We were talking about my schedule," she said, "about how I book shoots months in advance and weekends are often spoken for, and he said—" She stopped. Tried again. He said it in a way that sounded like a compliment, like he was praising my dedication, but the actual content of what he said was that I'd need to adjust my priorities when there were other things demanding my time. She looked up. "He's known me for 2 months. We've had 5 dinners, but already there are other things that I'd need to adjust my priorities for." "His things. His life," she said. "His schedule. His family's version of what a partner does and looks like and acts like." She exhaled slowly. "And the thing that bothers me most, the thing I can't shake, is that my mother called me on the way there to say she hoped I'd make a real effort tonight, like I hadn't been making efforts, like there's a version of me that would be more acceptable if I just tried a little harder to be that version." Logan didn't say anything immediately. The building made its nighttime sounds around them. the creak of the floor above, the distant hum of traffic on Gallatin. "How long have they been doing that?" he said. "Your parents." Emma turned the elephant over in her hands. "My whole life," she said. "But it got louder after I moved out. Like distance made them more anxious about it." She paused. "My dad is proud of me." "I know he is. But there's always this footnote. Like he'd be more proud if I'd added an asterisk to who I am. You know that's their problem, not yours." "I know that," she said. "I know it in my head. But knowing it and feeling it are different things, and tonight I just felt—" She stopped. "I felt very tired of being someone who needs to be improved." Logan looked at her. Really looked. The way you can when it's late and the lights are low, and the usual distance people keep between themselves has narrowed. She was 30 years old and talented and had built something real from a skill she'd cultivated through years of unglamorous work. And somewhere along the line, the people who were supposed to be in her corner had turned that corner into a hall of mirrors that reflected back a version of her they found more comfortable. "You don't need to be improved," he said. She looked at him. Something moved across her face that he couldn't entirely read. "I know," she said quietly. And then, after a beat, "Can I stay here tonight? I don't want to be in my own apartment right now." "Of course," he said. It cost him nothing to say. That was its own kind of answer, he supposed, though he wasn't examining it. She stayed on the couch. He brought out a blanket and the spare pillow that lived in the hall closet, and she took them with the ease of someone who was past the point of formality. He went to bed, but he lay awake longer than he expected, staring at the ceiling, listening to the building settle. In the morning, Mia found Emma asleep on the couch at 6:20 and greeted this development with the equanimity of someone who found everything in the world more or less equally interesting. "Emma's here," she announced to Logan in a stage whisper that was technically quieter than her normal voice. "She is," Logan confirmed, also in a whisper. "She needs breakfast," Mia said. "Probably." "I'll make her breakfast," Mia said, which meant she would pour a small pyramid of dry cereal into a bowl and present it as though she'd prepared a 4-course meal. By 7:15, the three of them were sitting at the kitchen table in the thin yellow light of a Wednesday morning, Mia eating her own cereal with focused intensity, Emma cradling her second cup of coffee with both hands and looking somewhat more like herself than she had the night before. "Thank you," Emma said, when Mia had abandoned her cereal and gone to locate a specific toy animal whose absence had suddenly become urgent. "For last night. For not making it a thing." "It's not a thing." She looked at him across the table. Her hair was slightly disordered from sleep, and she was still wearing the dress but had exchanged the heels for a pair of his socks, which were too large and had folded over at the toes. She looked nothing like the polished version of herself she'd been attempting the night before, and he thought, not for the first time, and with the same deliberate effort to move past it quickly, that she was more herself in this kitchen than anywhere else he'd ever seen her. "I need to ask you something," she said. "Okay." She turned her mug in her hands. "My mom is doing a family brunch this Saturday. At the house." She paused. "Grant's going to be there." Logan said nothing. He waited. "I want to go," Emma said. "I've been avoiding it, but I can't keep avoiding it. I need to go, and I need to—" She searched for the right word. "I need to say some things that I've been not saying for a long time." "That sounds like something you should do," he said. "I know." She looked at him directly. "Would you come with me?" He held her gaze. "As what?" It was the right question to ask. He saw her appreciate it. "As yourself," she said. "As my friend. I'm not asking you to pretend to be anything or anyone. I just—" She exhaled. "I need someone there who sees me the way I actually am, not the version they're trying to manage." A beat. "You see me?" The simplicity of it hit somewhere he hadn't expected. "Yeah," he said. "I'll come." She smiled. Not a performance of relief, just actual relief. Unguarded. "Okay," she said. "Okay, good." Mia returned from the back of the apartment triumphantly carrying a stuffed giraffe she'd been looking for. "Found it," she announced to the room, as though they'd all been waiting. "Thank goodness," Emma said, and she meant it in a way that was also about something else entirely. None. Saturday arrived the way Saturdays do when you've been dreading something. Too quickly. Logan wore the jacket he'd bought for Derek's wedding 2 years ago, the charcoal one that fit correctly across the shoulders and that Rachel had once said made him look like someone who had their life together. He wasn't sure why that detail surfaced as he was getting dressed, but it did, and he ignored it and finished buttoning the shirt. Emma knocked at 9:15. She was in a dress that was different from Tuesday's. Simpler, less armor-like, the green of late summer leaves. She'd done something with her hair that looked effortless in the way that things only look effortless when significant effort has gone into them. She looked at his jacket. "Good choice," she said. "My dead friend's wedding jacket," he said. "He's not dead. He's in accounting. It's similar." She smiled, and some of the tension in her shoulders released a fraction. Mia was spending the day with Logan's mother, a logistic that his mother had greeted with enthusiasm that made him briefly suspicious. She was 58, retired, and had developed a rich social life that revolved primarily around Mia and 2 book clubs that were mostly wine clubs in structural disguise. He dropped Mia off at 8:30. His mother had taken one look at him, the jacket, the buttoned shirt, and then at the name Emma, which she'd heard with some frequency in recent months, and said nothing, which was worse than if she'd said something. The drive to Brentwood took about 20 minutes. Emma was mostly quiet, which Logan had learned meant she was organizing thoughts rather than avoiding them. "My parents are going to be very polite to you," she said somewhere on a 65. "Okay. That's not necessarily a good thing." He glanced at her. "How politely impolite are we talking?" "My mother will ask you what you do 3 times, Emma said. Not because she forgot, because each time she asks, she'll be hoping for a different answer. Structural engineer doesn't hold up. It holds up fine. It's the single father part. Logan absorbed this. "Right. My dad will be fine," she said. He's not bad, my dad. He just defers to my mom in social situations because it's easier than not deferring." A pause. "And Grant will be there, and he's going to be very charming, and everyone's going to think I'm difficult if I say what I need to say." "You're not difficult." "No," she agreed, "but disagreeing with people who've decided the narrative is considered difficult." She turned to look at him. "I just want you to know what you're walking into." "Emma," he said. "Yeah. I spent 8 hours last week arguing with a city inspector about load-bearing wall classifications," he said. "I think I can handle brunch." She laughed. "The real one, the unguarded kind." It changed her whole face. "Yeah," she said. "Okay." The Carter house in Brentwood was the kind of house that had been decorated with the specific intention of signaling a particular kind of life. Not ostentatious. Diane Carter would have rejected ostentatious as vulgar, but curated to a degree that left no surface accidental. There were flowers that had been arranged rather than placed. There were family photos in frames that had been coordinated rather than simply chosen. They pulled into the circular driveway behind a silver car that Logan would have bet money was Grant Whitmore's before he'd ever laid eyes on Grant Whitmore, simply because it was the kind of car that said everything about itself in the first 3 seconds. He was right. Grant came out onto the front steps as they were getting out of Logan's truck, which was a working truck because Logan used it for work, and the contrast between the truck and the silver car was not subtle. Grant Whitmore was approximately Logan's age, maybe a year or 2 older, with the kind of build that came from a gym membership, and the kind of haircut that came from a barber who was called a stylist. He was wearing a blazer that cost more than Logan's bi-monthly car payment, and his smile reached his eyes in the practiced way of someone who'd learned that this was important. "Emma," he said, with a warmth that was accurate in volume and slightly off in frequency, like a radio station coming in almost clear. "Grant," she said. He looked at Logan with an expression of polite assessment that lasted 1 beat longer than necessary. Logan looked back with no particular expression at all. "This is my friend Logan," Emma said. Her voice was even. "Right," Grant said. He put his hand out, and Logan shook it. His grip was the kind of grip that was trying to convey something. Logan's grip didn't try to convey anything, which seemed to land differently than Grant expected. "I've heard the name." "Good things, I hope," Logan said. Of course. Grant smiled. The smile was technically flawless. Come on in. Inside, Diane Carter was operating at a frequency of controlled hospitality that Logan recognized as the kind of warmth that was also management. She was 60, trim, dressed with the precision of someone who'd never left the house underprepared. She kissed Emma's cheek and turned to Logan with an expression that was perfectly friendly and completely appraising. "Logan," she said, "Emma's mentioned you." "Good things, I hope," he said again, because apparently that was the sentence he was using today. "Of course." She said it the same way Grant had. "What is it that you do?" "Structural engineering," he said. "Oh, how interesting." She said it the way people say things they don't find interesting. "And you have a daughter?" Emma said. "Mia, she's 3. "Lovely." Diane Carter's smile held. "And her mother—" "Oh, we're not together," Logan said, simply, without loading it with anything. "Oh." A small pause that contained a paragraph. "I see." Philip Carter, Emma's father, was in the living room, and the difference between him and his wife was immediately legible. He was a tall man, thicker than he'd probably been in his 40s, with a handshake that was warm rather than performative, and eyes that looked at Logan with actual interest rather than assessment. "Logan," he said, "Emma talks about you." "Philip," his wife said, from somewhere nearby. "What?" "She does." He looked at Logan. "She says you're the most functional person she knows. High bar, apparently." Logan smiled. "I'll take it." "She also says you make soup," Philip said, as though this were a mark of serious character. "I don't make soup. I burn soup. Don't ask me how." "Philip," Diane said again. Emma caught Logan's eye across the room and something passed between them. A small acknowledgement, a shared understanding that they were now inside the dynamic she'd tried to describe on the drive down, and that it was more or less exactly as advertised. Brunch was served at 11. There were 8 people at the table. Emma's parents, Grant, a cousin of Emma's named Patrice, who seemed genuinely warm and had the look of someone who found family gatherings mildly exhausting, an older couple who were longtime friends of the Carters, and whose names Logan immediately lost in the noise of introductions, and Logan and Emma. It started fine. Polite conversation about the weather, about a renovation Diane was planning in the kitchen, about Grant's recent work trip to Atlanta. Logan ate, answered questions when they came to him, and mostly watched. He watched how Grant spoke to Emma. It was subtle, the kind of subtle that required paying attention, the slight repositioning of her sentences when he repeated them. The way he'd preface things with Emma tends to, or she has a habit of, in a tone that sounded affectionate but carried something heavier beneath it. Once, when she said something about a shoot she was planning in October, Grant smiled and said, "She's very committed to her schedule," in the tone of voice that sounds like praise but lands like a complaint. The table laughed softly. Emma smiled. But Logan saw what was underneath the smile, and it was neither amusement nor agreement. "What kind of work do you do, Logan?" Grant asked from across the table, at a moment when the conversation had paused naturally. "Structural engineering," Logan said. He'd already said this to Diane, but Grant apparently wanted to ask directly. "I work on commercial buildings, mostly, some residential." "Good. Stable work," Diane said, with a warmth that contained the word stable, like a period at the end of a sentence. "It is," Logan agreed. "And you raise your daughter on your own?" Grant said. There was nothing overtly pointed in the way he asked it, but Logan noticed the "on your own" where someone else might have said, "You're a father," or just "You have a daughter." "Yeah," Logan said. "That's admirable," Grant said. He meant it to sound admiring. It didn't quite. "A lot of responsibility." "It is," Logan said again. "Emma's mentioned you often," Grant continued. His voice was still pleasant, still conversational. "The neighbor, the friend." A slight pause that could have been nothing. "The reliable one." Logan looked at him steadily. "I try to be." "Must be nice," Grant said, "having that kind of arrangement. For both of you." He glanced at Emma with a smile. "A built-in support system." Emma set her fork down. It was a small movement. No one else at the table probably noticed it, but Logan did. "A support system," Emma said. Her voice was even. That's an interesting way to put it. Well, Grant said, the smile unchanged. It clearly works for you both. What does that mean? Emma said. The table shifted slightly. Diane reached for her water glass. Just that it's practical, Grant said, his tone easing toward the conciliatory. Having someone nearby who helps with things, who's always available. He let the always available sit there for a half second. It's a good arrangement. Logan isn't an arrangement, Emma said. Emma, her mother started. He's my best friend, Emma said. Not loudly, not with heat, but with a directness that closed off the ability to redirect or soften. He's the person I trust most, and I'd be careful about how you describe that. Grant held her gaze with the expression of someone who was deciding which version of patient to perform. I wasn't being disrespectful. I know you weren't, Emma said. You never are directly. That's sort of the point. The table was quiet now in a way that was different from earlier. Patrice, the cousin, appeared to be studying her plate with intense concentration. Philip Carter set his fork down slowly and looked at his daughter with an expression Logan couldn't entirely read, something between concern and, very faintly, a kind of recognition. Diane said, I think perhaps we should— I'd like to finish what I was saying, Mom, Emma said, politely, firmly. If that's all right. Diane closed her mouth. Emma turned back to Grant. You do this thing, she said, where you take something, a part of someone's life, a decision they've made, a person they care about, and you reframe it in a way that makes it seem smaller, less significant. You probably don't notice you're doing it, but I notice. I think you're misreading the situation, Grant said. Still pleasant, still smooth, but something had shifted in his eyes. Maybe, Emma said. I could be wrong, but I've been misreading a lot of situations lately in the same direction, and at some point the pattern becomes the point. The table absorbed this. Logan sat very still. He was watching Emma, and what he saw was someone who had packed something away for a long time and had finally, in this room, on this ordinary Saturday morning, decided to take it back out. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't raised. She was just steady, in a way that he recognized because he'd watched it build over 11 months of knowing her. Grant said something else, something measured, something reasonable sounding, and Emma answered it, and the conversation moved through a difficult quarter hour and came out the other side into a strained but functional politeness that got them through the rest of the meal. But as they left, as Logan followed Emma down the front steps to his truck, the silver car still sitting in the driveway looking like a question that had been asked wrong, he felt something he couldn't immediately name settling somewhere in his chest. She'd said, he's my best friend. He's the person I trust most. She'd said it in front of her mother and Grant Whitmore, and a table full of people for whom it mattered how things were defined. She'd said it without hesitating. Logan unlocked the truck and got in, and Emma got in on the other side, and for a moment they just sat there in the driveway with the engine off. You okay? He said. She exhaled slowly, let her head fall back against the headrest. Yeah, she said. Then, after a moment, no, not entirely. A pause. But more okay than I was before I said it. He nodded. She looked at him. Thank you for being there. Of course. I mean it, she said. You didn't have to say anything, and you were still— She stopped, searched. You were just there, in the way that mattered. He held her gaze for a second longer than he should have, and then he looked at the windshield and started the truck. The drive back to Nashville was quieter than the drive down, but it was a different kind of quiet. Not the tension of anticipating something, but the aftermath of something that had actually happened. Emma fell asleep somewhere around the Brentwood exits, her head tipped slightly toward the window, the green dress and the tangled thoughts finally losing the fight against exhaustion. Logan drove. He was thinking about what Grant had said, the reliable one, the built-in support system, always available. He was thinking about how easy it was to take something real and describe it in a way that made it sound like nothing. He was thinking about how, for 2 years, he'd told himself that being the steady one was enough, that being someone Mia could count on and Emma could rely on and his mother could call and Derek could text was a complete life. and wanting anything more than that was the kind of wanting that led to things getting broken. But steady wasn't the same as invisible, and reliable wasn't the same as forgettable. He wasn't sure what to do with that yet, but he was thinking about it. The city opened up ahead of them, the Cumberland glinting in the afternoon light, East Nashville pulling them back toward Lillian Avenue and a third-floor hallway and two doors 12 feet apart that had started to feel, lately, like a very short distance. He picked up Mia at 4:30, same as always. His mother met him at the door with the look she'd been wearing since that morning, the one that said she was holding a question in her mouth and deciding whether to release it. She lasted approximately 40 seconds. "How was brunch?" she said, handing over Mia's jacket. "Fine," Logan said. "Fine." "Fine, Mom." She studied him. Ruth Brooks had raised two sons on a teacher's salary after their father left when Logan was 11, which meant she had a well-developed sensitivity to the distance between what men said and what they meant, and she deployed it without apology. "Emma went with you," she said. Not a question. "She needed support at a family thing. I went." He took the jacket. "It was fine." "You said that." "Daddy," Mia said from somewhere in the living room, "Grandma let me have 2 cookies." "2 cookies," his mother said, before he could respond. "Because we were having a good afternoon." She looked at Logan. "You look like a man who had a complicated afternoon." "I look like a man who wants to get home and change his shoes." She let him go because she always let him go, which was different from not noticing. In the truck on the way home, Mia gave him a detailed account of the afternoon. The cookies, a movie about a bear that she described with a level of narrative complexity that suggested she may have invented portions of it, a phone call from Grandma's friend Carol that Mia had apparently participated in by announcing her name and then handing the phone back. Logan listened and made the right sounds and drove. He was still thinking about the driveway, about the truck cab, Emma asleep against the window, about what Grant had said, the reliable one. He pulled into the parking garage on Lillian and unclipped Mia's buckle and carried her up the stairs because she asked to be carried, and he said yes more often than he probably should, and he knew it, and he didn't particularly care. The hallway on the 4th floor was empty. Emma's door was closed. He gave Mia dinner, bath, books, bed. The routine held him in its shape the way it always did, grounding, repetitive, the kind of structure that was both comfort and container. By 8:30, the apartment was quiet. He sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water and did not turn the TV on. The week that followed had a strange quality to it, like a song playing in a different key, recognizably the same melody, but something slightly off in the resonance. He and Emma still saw each other. Tuesday, she knocked to borrow his colander because hers had gone somewhere she couldn't account for. Thursday, he brought her coffee because he'd made too much, which was a lie so transparent he didn't entirely understand why he told it. Friday evening, she sat on his kitchen counter while Mia showed her a drawing she'd made at school, a picture of a cat that looked more like a rectangle with ears but was labeled cat in Mia's emphatic block letters, which Emma regarded with the seriousness it apparently deserved. "The cat's name?" Emma asked Mia. "Stephen," Mia said. "Great name for a cat." "I know," Mia agreed. It was all exactly the same. And something was not exactly the same, and he couldn't locate it precisely, which bothered him the way a sound in the wall bothers you. Not because it's loud, but because you can't identify it. He was aware, in a way he'd been pushing down for months, that he felt something about Emma that didn't fit neatly into the category of friendship. He'd been aware of it for a long time, but awareness wasn't the same as action, and he'd built very specific walls around the distinction for reasons that he'd reviewed enough times to have them memorized. What Grant had said bothered him more than he wanted it to, not because it was wrong, exactly, but because it sounded, in the way that bad arguments sometimes do, like a distorted version of something true. He was reliable. He was always available. He was the one she came to when things fell apart. And there was a version of that story, the version Grant had told at that table, with that particular tone of voice, where those things made Logan a convenience rather than a choice. He didn't think he was a convenience, but the doubt, once in, was hard to reason out of yourself. On Wednesday evening, he was on a call with Derek, which was their irregular catch-up that both of them treated as more optional than it should be, and then always felt better after. So this brunch, Derek said. He was eating something. Logan could hear the specific percussion of chips. What was this guy like? Polished, Logan said. The kind of polish that's a full-time job. Rich? Comfortably. And he was, what, auditioning to be her boyfriend? He's been auditioning for a while. Her family seems to like the idea. But Emma doesn't, Derek said. Not a question. Emma. Logan stopped. Emma went because she had things to say, and she said them. I think she's figuring out where she stands with all of it. A pause. Derek's chip eating stopped. What about where you stand? Derek said. I'm her friend. Yeah, I know that part, Derek said. What else? Logan looked at the kitchen ceiling. Mia's drawings were on the refrigerator. Stephen the cat, and a newer one that appeared to be either a house or a robot, the label having smeared before it dried. I'm her friend, he said again. Derek made a sound that was not agreement. Okay, he said. Sure. Derek, I'm not saying anything. You're clearly saying something. I'm saying okay and sure, Derek said. Those are both very neutral words. A pause. I'm also saying that you've mentioned this woman in some version of every conversation we've had for the past 8 months, and you've never once described her the way you describe someone who's just a friend. Logan didn't answer. Also, Derek said, I've met you, and you're not great at letting yourself want things. You're great at being responsible for things. Those aren't the same. He was quiet for a moment. She might be figuring out whether she wants Grant. Does she want Grant? I don't know. Does she want you? I don't... He stopped. I don't know that either. Have you asked? No? Why not? Because, Logan thought, I have a 3-year-old daughter and a second-floor apartment and a truck with a dented rear panel, and I spent 2 years convincing myself that was enough to build on, and I'm not in the habit of reaching for things I'm not sure I'm allowed to have. He didn't say any of that. Because it's not that simple, he said. Derek ate another chip. Nothing's simple, he said, but some things are worth it anyway. They talked for another 20 minutes about other things. Derek's job, a fishing trip he was planning, a new restaurant in Germantown that he insisted Logan had to try. By the time they hung up, it was past 9:30, and the apartment had the specific stillness of nighttime, and Logan sat on the couch for a long time with his phone on the cushion beside him and didn't turn the TV on. The invitation arrived for Emma on Thursday morning. She told him about it that evening in the hallway, which had become their unofficial meeting point. Neither of them planned it, but it kept happening, the two of them ending up in that 12-foot stretch between their doors, the way you end up in a particular spot in a room without deciding to go there. Grant's family is hosting an engagement party, she said. His cousin is getting married. Big event, venue downtown, the whole thing. She had a look on her face he'd come to recognize as the one she wore when she was deciding how much to say. He called and asked if I'd go with him. Logan leaned against his door frame. And? I said I'd think about it. She looked at him. Then I thought about it for about 4 hours and decided I didn't want to go. But my mother called, and somehow, an hour after that, I had said yes. How does that keep happening? Because she talks about things in a way where saying no requires actively taking a position, Emma said, with the weary accuracy of someone who'd been charting this dynamic their whole life. And she does it so pleasantly that by the time you realize you've agreed to something, you're already agreeing to it. You could call her back. I could. She paused. I'm not going to because I think... She stopped, started again. I think there's something I still need to see clearly, about Grant, about how his people operate. I want to watch it without the possibility of being surprised by it later. Logan looked at her for a moment. There was something working in her expression, not indecision exactly, but the particular focus of someone who was running a calculation. Would you come? She said. He knew she was going to ask before she asked, and he knew his answer before it came out. Yeah, he said. Something in her face shifted slightly, as though she'd been holding tension she hadn't acknowledged. The thing is, she said, it'll be more formal than brunch. Different crowd. Grant's crowd. She looked at him steadily. He's going to make it about the optics. He does that. He'll be charming and polished, and he'll try to make me look like I'm the one who's being difficult, and he'll probably... She stopped. He'll probably do the thing he did at brunch, Logan said. The reframing. Yes. And you want to be ready for it. I want to be honest about what it is, Emma said, and I want someone there who sees it the same way. The way she said someone, with that particular weight, not just anyone, but the specific person she was looking at, landed somewhere below the level he usually let things land. Okay, he said. She nodded slowly. Thank you, Logan. He went back inside and closed the door and stood in his living room for a moment. He was doing it again, he thought, the reliable thing, showing up, being available, all the things Grant had described at that table with that particular shade of diminishment. But the thing was, and this was where Derek's question kept circling back, he wasn't showing up because he had nothing else to do. He wasn't going because she'd asked, and he had no good reason to say no. He was going because she was the person he most wanted to be in proximity to, and the reasons behind that had nothing to do with convenience and everything to do with the fact that he'd spent 11 months quietly learning her, and what he'd learned had only made it worse, in the specific way that knowing someone well makes you less capable of pretending you don't care what happens to them. He knew that. He'd known it for a while. The question he kept not answering was what to do with it. The engagement party was on Friday evening at a venue in the Gulch, the kind of place that had exposed brick and custom lighting, and a catering team that wore all black and moved like they were in a choreographed production. Logan wore the charcoal jacket again. Emma wore something ivory and simple that managed to look both effortless and entirely considered. They drove together. She was quieter on this drive than she'd been on the brunch drive, which meant she was closer to whatever she was building toward. You don't have to say anything tonight, she said, when they were maybe 5 minutes out. I wasn't planning to. I just mean, if it gets uncomfortable, if he does the thing, you can let me handle it. He glanced at her. Emma, I know. She looked out the window. I know you know. I'm just... She stopped. Nervous. You're allowed to be. I don't like being nervous. Nobody does. She turned back toward him. Do you get nervous? He thought about it. About things I can't calculate, he said. About the stuff where there's no load chart. Yeah. She was quiet for a moment. What are you nervous about right now? The question landed differently than she probably meant it, because she was asking in the context of the evening, the party, Grant, and his family. But it touched something adjacent to the thing he'd been sitting with all week. The usual, he said, which was not a lie and not the whole truth. She seemed to accept it, and they pulled up to the venue. The party was large, 60, maybe 70 people in a space that managed them comfortably, with the kind of ambient noise that meant individual conversations were private by default. Grant found them within 3 minutes of arrival, which told Logan he'd been watching for them. He was impeccably turned out. The blazer tonight was darker than the brunch one, more fitted. He touched Emma's shoulder in greeting, a specific kind of touch, proprietary without being overt, the kind you noticed if you were looking, and shook Logan's hand with the same grip as before, like muscle memory. Glad you made it, Grant said, to both of them, though his eyes were on Emma. Congratulations to your cousin, Emma said. Lacey will be thrilled you're here. He steered them toward the bar with the ease of a man who was accustomed to moving people in the direction he preferred. She's been asking about you. I may have mentioned you were coming. There it was. The first move. I mentioned you. Establishing that Emma's presence here was something he'd claimed in advance, something he'd told people to expect. Mild, practically invisible, but there. Logan took a glass of water from the bar. Emma took wine. The evening moved through its phases. There were introductions. Grant's family, his friends, people from his professional life who wore their success in the particular way of people who'd never seriously doubted it. Everyone was pleasant to Emma in a specific way that contained, underneath the pleasantness, evaluation. She was being assessed for fit. Logan could see her running the same read on it that he was, and doing it better, because she'd been running it her whole life. To Logan, the treatment was different, not unkind, just differently categorized. He was Emma's friend. The word had been in Grant's introduction, the same way it had been at brunch, carrying the same faint suggestion of a bracket that contained something you didn't need to take entirely seriously. A few of Grant's friends asked what he did. He told them. They nodded in the way people nod when they're filing information under a heading they've already decided on. He wasn't bothered by any of it, exactly. He'd never needed these people's approval. But he was watching it happen, and he was cataloging it, because it was the same mechanism Emma had been describing since Tuesday night in his kitchen, and seeing it in real time made it legible in a way that her descriptions had already suggested, but that watching confirmed. About an hour in, Grant pulled Emma toward a small group near the windows. His parents, an aunt, the engaged cousin. Logan stayed at a slight remove, which was fine, which was where he was supposed to be in this geography. He could still see her. He watched her work the conversation. The smile that was real enough to read as genuine and careful enough to not commit to more than it meant. The way she angled her body when she was uncertain versus when she was comfortable. The way her hands moved when she was being asked questions she found slightly exhausting. Grant's father was talking. His mother was talking. Emma was answering, nodding, doing the work of being present in a space that required performance. And then Logan saw it happen, the moment it shifted. He couldn't hear the conversation from where he was standing, but he saw Grant say something to the group, gesturing slightly in Logan's direction, and he saw the expressions on the faces around him perform a particular recalibration. Not hostile, just recalibrating, like they'd received information that adjusted the picture. Emma's smile didn't move, but something beneath it went still. Logan set his glass down and walked over. He came in on the tail end of it, Grant in the middle of a sentence, which is great, having that kind of support system when you're raising a kid alone. Very practical arrangement. Emma looked at Logan when he arrived. Her eyes held something he could read but probably shouldn't read in front of 12 people. "Your friend was just telling us about the building you live in," Grant's mother said to Emma, warm and social, and entirely unaware that she'd just handed Logan the context he needed. How convenient it must be, having a neighbor who helps out. Convenient, Emma repeated, softly. That's one way to put it. It's a friendship, Logan said. Everyone looked at him. He said it without weight, without defensiveness, just as a correction of the record. Of course, Grant said, smooth as ever. I was just telling them how you two have worked out a good system. Mutual support. It's practical, especially with a child involved. It's a friendship, Logan said again. He kept his voice even. Not a system, not an arrangement. She's my best friend, that's the whole thing. Grant's smile held, but something behind it shifted. He wasn't used to being answered that directly by someone he'd already categorized. Of course, he said again. Emma looked at Logan, and the look she gave him, just for a second before she turned back to the group, was the kind of look that doesn't come with a label, but lands fully anyway. Grant's mother moved the conversation elsewhere. The moment passed. The party continued. But later, near the end of the evening, when the crowd had thinned and the ambient noise had dropped to something more intimate, Logan found himself standing near the windows with Emma beside him, and the city spread out below them in its nighttime version. Light and movement and the indifferent continuity of a place that doesn't care what's happening in any particular room. You didn't have to do that, Emma said quietly. I know, but I'm glad you did. She looked at the window rather than at him. He does that thing so smoothly. You almost can't argue with it in the moment because it sounds so reasonable. It's not reasonable, Logan said. It's just described that way. She was quiet for a moment. I've been thinking, she said, about why I kept going to these things. The dinners, the brunch, tonight. She paused. I think part of me was trying to figure out whether I was being too critical, whether I was the problem, whether I was reading things wrong. And? She turned to look at him. I'm not reading it wrong, she said. I've been reading it exactly right for months. I just didn't want to trust my own read. Logan looked at her. The room was low lit and the party was winding down around them, and she looked, right now, like a person who had arrived at the end of a long argument with herself. Why didn't you trust it? He asked. She was quiet for a moment. Because the people telling me I was wrong were the people I was supposed to trust, she said. My mom. My family. People who've known me my whole life. She exhaled. It's hard to maintain your own version of reality when people who love you keep offering you a different one. They're not wrong because they love you, Logan said. They're wrong because they're looking at you and seeing who they want you to be. Those are two different things. She turned to face him fully, the ivory dress, the city behind her, the particular expression she had when something landed true. Yeah, she said. Yeah, that's exactly it. They stood together for another moment in the dwindling party. Somewhere behind them, Grant was talking to his father, and his father was laughing at something, and the world Grant occupied continued in its orbit without caring whether Emma was in it. She wasn't looking at that world. She was looking at Logan. And he was looking at her, in the way that he'd been looking at her for months and then looking away from, because looking away had felt like the responsible thing to do. The safe thing. The thing that didn't risk anything he wasn't sure he could afford to lose. But standing here, with the city spread out below them, and the memory of Grant's voice saying reliable one and practical arrangement and support system still sitting in the air between them, Logan felt, with a clarity that was slightly uncomfortable in its bluntness, that he was tired of looking away. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. But the space between them, which had been 12 feet for 11 months, felt different now. Not smaller exactly, but less like a gap and more like a distance that was being reconsidered. They left the party at 10:30. Grant walked them out with the grace of a man who had decided to take the loss with dignity, which Logan suspected was its own kind of calculation, preserving the image, banking goodwill, leaving the door technically open. Emma, he said at the entrance with the particular cadence of a man who's repositioning. Let's talk this week. I think there's been some misunderstanding. I'll think about it, Emma said, with a politeness so clean it had edges. In the car, she didn't say much for the first few minutes. Logan drove. The city moved past the windows. I'm done, she said finally, not dramatically, flatly, the way you say a fact. With Grant? With all of it. She looked out the window. The dinners, the trying. The way I've been showing up to these things and bending myself sideways, trying to figure out if there's a version where it makes sense. A pause. It doesn't make sense. I've been waiting for it to make sense, and it was never going to. What are you going to tell your mom? She was quiet for a moment. The truth, she said, which she's not going to love, but I'm done telling her a version of it that she finds easier. He nodded. She looked at him from the passenger seat. Thank you, she said. For tonight, for brunch, for... She stopped. For all of it, Logan. I mean it. I know you do, he said. She turned back to the window. He drove them home through the late-night city, the truck familiar under him, the route so practiced it didn't require thought. And he thought, in the quiet of the cab, about what Derek had said, about wanting things, about the distance between responsible and present, about the way Emma had looked at him near those windows before either of them said anything. He wasn't going to figure it all out tonight, he knew that, but something had shifted somewhere in the last 2 weeks in a way that was no longer as easy to push back down as it used to be. The building on Lillian came into view. He pulled into the garage. They rode the elevator to the 4th floor in a silence that was comfortable and slightly charged, and neither of them commented on either quality. At their doors, 12 feet of hallway, the same as always, Emma turned her key in her lock and then paused. Logan, she said. Yeah. She looked at him across the hallway. Something moved across her face. A thought, a decision. Maybe just the edge of something not quite ready to be spoken. Good night, she said. Good night, Emma. She went inside. He went inside. He stood in his living room in the dark for a moment, the city quiet outside the windows, Mia asleep down the hall. The distance between their two doors was 12 feet. He was beginning to understand, clearly and without anywhere left to redirect it, that it was also the distance between everything staying the way it was and something being entirely different. He wasn't sure which side of it scared him more. He didn't sleep well that night. This wasn't unusual. There were plenty of nights when Logan's brain refused to downshift at a reasonable hour, when it kept running load calculations or replaying work conversations or simply idling in that gray space between tired and actually resting. But this was different. This wasn't his brain working through a problem. This was his brain circling something it had decided to finally look at directly, after months of strategic avoidance. He lay on his back in the dark with the ceiling fan turning slow overhead and thought about what Derek had said. You're great at being responsible for things. Those aren't the same as wanting them. He thought about the way Emma had looked at him by those windows at the party, the particular quality of it, not the look you give a friend. Or maybe he was reading into it the thing he wanted to read, which was exactly the kind of error a man in his position would make. He didn't know. That was the honest answer. He didn't know, and not knowing felt, at 2 a.m, like its own special kind of unbearable. He was up at 6:15 anyway, because his body still didn't trust alarm clocks. The week that followed had a provisional quality, like everyone involved was waiting for something to resolve, though none of them would have said so out loud. Emma called her mother on Sunday. Logan knew this because Emma texted him afterward, called my mom. She took it about as well as I expected. He texted back, "You okay?" She replied, "Yeah, I think so." It needed to happen. He wanted to knock on her door. He didn't. He told himself she needed space to process it, which was true, and also a convenient reason not to do the thing that frightened him. Grant apparently called twice that week. Emma mentioned it in passing on Wednesday when they were both at the mailboxes in the lobby. The kind of incidental overlap their schedules produced with enough frequency that Logan had stopped pretending it was entirely incidental. "Did you talk to him?" Logan asked. "Second call," she said. "He was very reasonable about it." She pulled out a stack of envelopes and looked at them without reading them. Which is the thing about Grant. He's always very reasonable. He frames everything as a misunderstanding, and himself as the patient one. She looked up. "He said he thinks we got off to a rocky start, and he'd like the chance to show me a different side of things." "What did you say?" "I said I appreciated that." A pause. "And then I said I didn't think the rocky start was the problem. I said I thought I'd seen exactly as much of him as I needed to." Logan looked at her. "How'd he take that?" "He said he was sorry I felt that way." "Not, 'I'm sorry I made you feel that way.'" "No," Emma said. "Just that he was sorry I felt it." She smiled slightly. The dry kind. The kind that acknowledged the gap between what a person says and what they mean. He's good at the almost apology. She tucked her mail under her arm and looked at Logan for a moment. "My mother called again last night," she said. "She's not happy. She keeps saying I'm making a mistake, that I'm being too selective, that at some point I need to be realistic." She said the word realistic with a particular flatness that communicated everything she thought of it. What she means is that I'm 30 and I'm not married, and she's scared about it in a way she can't entirely articulate, so she calls it realism. "She loves you," Logan said. "I know she does." "And she's wrong." Emma said both things with the same certainty, as though they weren't in conflict. You can love someone and be wrong about what's good for them. She went back upstairs. Logan stood at the mailboxes for a moment with his own stack of envelopes, 2 bills, a hardware catalog he'd never subscribed to, something from Mia's preschool about an upcoming event, and thought about what she'd said. You can love someone and be wrong about what's good for them. He turned the sentence over, let it point in a few different directions. Then he went upstairs and made dinner and didn't think about it anymore, or tried not to. The second invitation came from Grant's family, and this one wasn't for Emma alone. It was a formal engagement celebration, the larger, more official version of the Friday party, the kind of event that required a printed invitation with gold foil lettering and a dress code printed at the bottom in italics. Grant had apparently sent it to Emma through her mother, which was either a strategic choice or a tactical one, and either way, it ensured that declining it became a multi-front conversation. Emma showed Logan the invitation on a Thursday evening, standing in her own kitchen this time. He'd come over because she'd said she had leftover lasagna, and he'd learned in 11 months that Emma's lasagna was genuinely better than his, a fact he'd admitted once in which she'd never let slide into obscurity. "He sent it through my mom," she said. She was standing at the counter, the invitation flat on the marble beside her coffee mug. "Which means my mom's already expecting me to go. And if I don't go, I am not just declining Grant, I'm having a whole other conversation with her." Logan looked at the invitation. The venue was listed as the Riverfront Club. A private event space in East Nashville, actually, one of those restored industrial buildings that had been converted into something tasteful and expensive. He knew the address. He'd walked past it. "What do you want to do?" he asked. Emma turned her coffee mug in her hands. "I want to go," she said, and she said it in a way that surprised him slightly. "I know that sounds—" She stopped. "I want to go because I want to walk into a room where Grant has assembled his entire world and be completely clear to myself and to him and to everyone watching that I know exactly what this is and I'm not confused about it anymore." She looked at Logan. "Does that make sense?" "It makes sense," he said. "I want to be the version of myself who isn't apologizing for not fitting the shape they had in mind," she said, "and I want to do that in the room where it's hardest to do it." He looked at her for a long moment. He understood it. The specific need to face something on its own ground rather than retreating from it. He'd felt that before. Not in his personal life, where retreat had often looked like responsibility, but he understood the mechanics. "You're going to ask me to come," he said. "Yes," she said. No performance around it, just yes. "Okay," he said. She nodded. Something settled in her expression. "Logan," she said. "Yeah. I need you to know—" She stopped, started again. "This isn't about having backup or someone to make things less uncomfortable. I need you to know that." He looked at her. "I know that." She held his gaze for a second too long to be entirely comfortable, and then she looked down at her coffee. "Okay," she said. "Good." He finished the lasagna. He went home. He lay awake again, not as long this time, and the question that kept circling was not what she meant, but what he was going to do about it. Because he was beginning to understand, in the slow, reluctant way that you understand things you've been successfully avoiding, that he was in love with her. Not falling. Not almost. Months ago would have been more accurate, maybe longer, and he still didn't know what she felt. He had evidence that could be read two ways, and he wasn't the kind of person who acted on ambiguous evidence where the stakes were this high. He needed something clearer. He needed to not misread the load. The Riverfront Club on a Saturday evening was exactly what the invitation implied. Careful, beautiful, expensively maintained. A former warehouse with 16-foot ceilings and industrial fixtures recontextualized into elegance, the kind of space that felt both imposing and carefully casual, which was a specific feat of interior design and required significant money to achieve. Grant Whitmore's social circle was in attendance in force, 80, maybe 90 people. The engaged couple, his cousin Lacey, and her fiancé, a man named Drew, who seemed genuinely pleasant and mildly overwhelmed by the scale of his own engagement party, were receiving guests near the entrance. Grant stood nearby, playing host with the ease of someone who'd done it many times. He saw them come in. Logan watched him see them. The brief recalibration, the smile that was deployed like a tool. "Emma," he said, and he did the shoulder touch again, the same proprietary placement as last time. And Emma this time stepped slightly sideways as she turned to greet him, so the touch caught the edge of her arm rather than its intended purchase. It was subtle. It was intentional. Logan saw Grant notice it and file it. "Grant," Emma said. "Congratulations to Lacey and Drew." "They're thrilled you're here." He looked at Logan. "Logan?" The handshake, the grip. "Glad you could make it." "Thanks for having me," Logan said, which was not precisely accurate, but was what you say. They moved into the party. Emma's mother was there. Diane Carter had apparently been invited independently, which told Logan this had been planned, that this room had been assembled with some deliberateness. He watched Emma see her mother across the room and watched the micro-expression that moved through her face. Not quite dread, but the recognition of a variable she'd have to manage. "Did you know your mom would be here?" he said, low, as they moved toward the bar. "No," Emma said. Her voice was even. "But I should have." Diane Carter was in conversation with two women near the windows when they reached her. She kissed Emma's cheek. She shook Logan's hand with a warmth that was, he now recognized, the Carter family's specific flavor of evaluation wearing the costume of graciousness. "Logan," she said, "how lovely." "Lovely to be here," he said. Emma looks wonderful, Diane said to Logan specifically, as though Emma weren't standing 18 inches away. I was afraid she'd be tired from the week. She's been a small pause that was not accidental. Working through some things. She seems fine to me, Logan said. Diane smiled. Of course. Emma looked at Logan with an expression that contained the specific gratitude of someone who's been slightly protected and doesn't want to make a thing of it. The party deepened. Logan learned the rhythms of it, which conversations were genuine, which were performance, where the pressure points were. Grant's family operated in a mode of pleasant dominance that was so deeply habituated they probably weren't conscious of it. They were generous hosts and careful social architects, and there was no malice in any of it, which was almost the problem. It was all goodwill and gentle management, and you couldn't argue with goodwill. An hour in, Logan was talking to Drew, the groom-to-be, who had turned out to be a high school science teacher from Donaldson and was significantly more interesting than his fiancée's family's social circle had prepared Logan to expect. They were talking about the particular experience of being the outsider in a room that wasn't unkind but wasn't entirely welcoming either, and Drew was doing it with the humor of someone who'd made his peace with his position. Lacey's family is great, Drew said, holding his drink. They really are. It's just... He searched. It's a specific kind of great that assumes a specific kind of person, and I'm not always that person. Yeah, Logan said. I know what you mean. Drew looked at him with the appraising glance of someone arriving at a shared condition. You and Emma, he said. You two together? Friends, Logan said. Drew nodded slowly, in the way of someone who had an opinion they were keeping to themselves. Right, he said. Cool. A pause. She looks at you like... He stopped. Never mind. No, Logan said. What? Drew looked slightly cornered. Like you're the only person in the room she's not performing for, he said. That's all I meant. He took a drink. Lacey looks at me that way, and it's the reason I'm here, so... He shrugged. For what it's worth. Logan absorbed this. Looked across the room to where Emma was standing with a small group. Grant nearby, Diane nearby, the social geometry of the evening arranged in a way that was either natural or orchestrated, and possibly both. She was doing the smile, the one that was real enough to pass. And then, as if she felt the direction of his attention, she looked up and found him across the room. And for just a second, she dropped the smile entirely, and the expression she wore instead was something plainer and more honest than anything she'd shown anyone else in this building tonight. Drew was right. Logan put his drink down. He crossed the room at a normal pace, not urgent, not conspicuous. Grant was in the middle of something, addressing the small group around Emma, his voice warm and inclusive and slightly elevated in a way that said he was performing rather than simply talking. Emma was listening with her arms loosely crossed, which Logan now recognized as her tell for discomfort she was managing. He caught the end of it as he arrived. Which is why I think it's worth taking our time, Grant was saying, his hand moving in that practiced gesture of reasonableness. Emma's made it clear she values her independence, and that's something I've always admired about her. He smiled at her, and it was a perfect smile, textbook, the kind that photographs beautifully. But some things are worth being patient for. Emma looked at him. Grant, I think the situation has been misread, he continued pleasantly, addressing the group now rather than Emma specifically, which was a neat trick. You couldn't exactly interrupt a man who was talking to 7 people. We hit some friction, as any 2 people do, but I don't think friction means incompatibility. I said we weren't compatible, Emma said. Her voice was level. That's different from friction. You were upset, Grant said, with a gentleness that reframed her statement as emotional rather than considered. We both were. I think in calmer circumstances. I'm calm now, Emma said. A small pause moved through the group. Emma, Diane said, from her position 3 feet away. Maybe this isn't the place. You invited me to the place, Mom. Emma said it without heat, without raising her voice, but with the specific clarity of someone who has decided they are done being managed. And I've been thinking about what I want to say in it. Grant's smile held. It took effort now. Logan could see the effort, the slight tightening at the corners. I think what Emma is feeling, Grant started. Don't, Emma said. The word was quiet, and it stopped him completely. Don't tell the room what I'm feeling, she said. You've been doing that at brunch, at the other party, in our phone call last week. Describing what I'm feeling in a way that sounds like understanding and is actually just you deciding what version of me is most convenient. She looked at him directly. I'm not confused. I'm not upset. I'm not going through a phase or having a reaction that needs to be waited out. Grant's expression shifted into something she hadn't seen before. Not anger, not quite, but the thing underneath the polished surface when the polish gets disturbed. I think you're being, he started. I'm being clear, Emma said. You find that difficult because clear people can't be redirected. She glanced at her mother. A look that was not apology and not rebellion, but something more adult than either, something that said, I know you're watching and I need to do this anyway. Then she looked back at Grant. This isn't me being emotional. This is me telling you, plainly, that we're done. The group had gone very quiet, and then Grant did something Logan hadn't expected. Maybe it was the audience. Maybe it was the calculation that he'd already lost the position and could only decide how to lose it. But the pleasantness dropped, not dramatically, not with visible hostility, just dropped, like a coat coming off. You know what your problem is, Emma? He said. His voice was still controlled, still technically civil, but the warmth had left it. You're so committed to this version of yourself, the independent woman, the artist, the one who doesn't need anything from anyone, that you can't recognize when something is actually good for you. Emma didn't blink. And you? He glanced at Logan, and what was in the glance was more honest than anything he'd said all evening. You run to your neighbor, your safe option, the man who's always there because he doesn't have anywhere else to be. His voice was smooth, but the words had edges now. You think that's a relationship? Someone you rely on because it's convenient and he's available, and it makes you feel independent without actually requiring anything of you? Logan looked at him steadily. He felt the words settle into him, felt the specific location they were aimed at, the doubt he'd been carrying, the version of himself that wondered if being reliable made him irrelevant. He felt it land, and he let it land, because pretending it didn't would have been dishonest. But the thing was, he knew the difference between a man who understood him and a man who was trying to use something true in a way that was false. Grant had identified a real fear and was deploying it as a weapon, and those were not the same operation. He was about to speak, carefully, without heat, when Emma turned to him. And what happened next was something Logan would think about for a long time afterward, in the way that you carry certain moments not because they were dramatic, but because they were true. Emma looked at him, not at Grant, not at her mother, at Logan. And then she turned back to the room, to Grant, to her mother, to the small gathered audience of this Saturday evening. And when she spoke, her voice was entirely steady. Logan isn't my safe option, she said. He isn't my backup. He isn't a support system or a convenience or a way of avoiding something real. She paused. He's the person I want beside me. Not when things fall apart, not because he's available, because he's the one I choose. The room was quiet. Grant looked at her for a moment with an expression that moved through several things too quickly to name. Then he looked at Logan, and something had gone out of the look, the calculation, the measuring. What was left was simpler and less comfortable. Is that right? Grant said. Not quite a question. Yes, Emma said, quietly, completely. Diane Carter said nothing. She was looking at her daughter in a way Logan couldn't fully read, not angry, not happy, but with the expression of someone who has just encountered a version of a person they thought they knew and is adjusting to the new information. Logan looked at Emma. She looked back at him, and what was in her face now, with Grant standing 3 feet away and her mother watching and 80 strangers doing what strangers do when a private moment goes public, was the plainest, most undefended version of her he'd ever seen. Not performing, not managing, not trying to fit a shape someone else had drawn. Just herself, looking at him. He opened his mouth. He didn't have a speech. He hadn't prepared for this because this was not the kind of thing you could prepare for. Okay, he said. She almost laughed, a small sound that escaped before she caught it. Okay, she said. Yeah, he said. Okay. It was not articulate. It was not graceful. But Emma's expression shifted in a way that told him it was exactly the right thing, which was maybe how you knew when something was true. Not because it was polished, but because it landed. Grant said something else. Logan would later be unable to recall exactly what. Something final, something dignified. The last calculated move of a man who'd decided to exit with whatever image was salvageable. It was aimed at Emma and then at Logan, and it had the specific quality of words deployed after a decision has already been made, when the words are no longer about the outcome, but about the speaker. Emma didn't respond to it. Neither did Logan. What Logan did was hold her gaze while Grant spoke, the way you hold a line against a current, not straining, just present, just there. Diane Carter excused herself first. Then the small group dispersed the way groups do when the conversation they've been watching concludes. Some moving away quickly, some lingering, all of them with the slightly dazed expression of people who'd expected a party and gotten something unscripted. Grant walked away, toward his family, toward the part of the room that was his. Logan watched him go and felt no particular satisfaction, which surprised him slightly, just the neutral observation of something reaching its end. He turned back to Emma. She was looking at her hands. Then she looked up. "I meant that," she said. Her voice had come down to almost private, the party noise around them making a kind of shelter. "I know," he said. "I didn't plan to say it like that." "I know." She exhaled. It was a long exhale, the kind that releases more than just air. "I need a minute," she said. "Can we?" She looked around the room. "Can we find somewhere quiet?" There was a corridor off the main space. Logan had noticed it earlier, the way he notices load-bearing structures out of habit. They moved through the edge of the party and into it, and the noise dropped behind them like a curtain. It was just a hallway. Exposed brick, soft lighting, a couple of chairs against the wall that were probably decorative. Emma leaned against the wall and looked at the ceiling for a moment, and Logan stood beside her with his hands in his pockets. "Are you okay?" he asked. She stopped. "I don't know what I am." She looked at him, relieved, terrified, both at the same time, which is an uncomfortable combination. "What are you terrified of?" She looked at him for a long moment. In the hallway, with the party muffled behind them and the brick wall cool at her back, she looked less like the woman who'd just stood in a room and said something irreversible, and more like Emma, his Emma, the one who sat on his kitchen floor eating pizza and fell asleep on his couch and understood exactly what he meant when he said a thing was complicated without needing him to explain why. "That I just said something true in front of a room full of people," she said, "and now I actually have to live with it." He looked at her. "What did you say that was true?" She held his gaze. "You know what I said." "I'd like to hear you say it again," he said. "Not in front of Grant, not in front of your mom." He paused. "Just here." She was quiet for a moment. The corridor around them was still. From behind the curtain of the party, someone laughed at something, distant and irrelevant. "You're the one I choose," Emma said. Quietly, without the room, without the audience, without any of the architecture of the moment that had surrounded it the first time. Just the words. Logan looked at her. He was aware of his own heartbeat in a way that was unusual for him. He was not generally a man who noticed his own heartbeat. "Emma," he said, "I know this is—" She stopped. "I know there's a lot. Mia and us being neighbors, and the fact that I basically knocked on your door 2 weeks ago having a crisis and now I'm—" "Emma," he said again. She stopped. "I've been in love with you for months," he said. He said it the way he might state a structural fact, not without feeling, but without decoration, because it was true and dressing it up would have made it smaller. "I didn't say anything because I didn't know if you—" He stopped. "I'm not good at believing I'm what someone chooses. I'm better at being what someone needs. And I couldn't tell the difference." She stared at him. "Can you tell the difference now?" she said. He thought about the windows at the party. Drew's voice. "She looks at you like you're the only person she's not performing for." He thought about his kitchen at midnight and her falling asleep in his truck, and the particular look she'd turned on him across a crowded room when she dropped everything she was performing for everyone else. "Yeah," he said. I think so. She reached out and put her hand on his forearm. Not dramatically, not building to something, just placing it there the way you touch something to confirm it's real. They stood in the corridor for a moment, the party continuing without them on the other side of the wall, and neither of them said anything else. Because some things, when they finally become true, don't need more words right away. They just need the room to settle into. Eventually, Emma exhaled again. This one slower, deeper, the kind that actually reaches the bottom. We should probably go back in, she said. Probably. Neither of them moved for another few seconds. Then Emma pushed off the wall, straightened her dress, and looked at him with an expression that was equal parts nervous and certain, which he was beginning to understand was just what she looked like when she was being completely honest. Come on, she said. He followed her back into the party. Grant was across the room, composed, in conversation with his father. Diane Carter was near the windows with two women Logan didn't recognize, and she looked up when Emma came back through. And the look that passed between mother and daughter was long and complicated and private in the way that some things between parents and children always are. Emma looked back at her mother without flinching, and then she looked away. Logan stood beside her as the party moved on around them. The clinking of glasses, the ambient noise of other people's celebrations, the completely ordinary machinery of an event that had contained, in a hallway off the main room, something that had changed the shape of everything. He was still aware of his own heartbeat. It didn't feel bad. They left before 9, not dramatically. No exit speech, no pointed goodbye to Grant, no moment staged for the room. Emma simply touched Logan's arm and said, "I'm ready." And he nodded, and they found Lacey and Drew to say a genuine congratulations, and then they walked out into the night air of East Nashville, the riverfront club behind them. The Cumberland visible 2 blocks south, the city doing what cities do on Saturday evenings without caring at all what had just happened inside. Emma exhaled the moment they cleared the door. A long breath, both lungs, like she'd been holding it for 2 hours. "Okay," she said, to herself as much as to him. They walked to the truck without talking. The silence was different from the silences they'd had on previous drives. Less provisional, less weighted with the things neither of them had said. Something had been said now, in a corridor off a party neither of them wanted to be at. With the muffled noise of other people's celebration on the other side of the wall, they had said actual things, and now the silence had the quality of aftermath rather than anticipation. He unlocked the truck. They got in. He started it, but didn't pull out yet. "Your mom," he said. "I know." Emma looked at her hands in her lap. "I saw her face when we came back in." "What did you see?" She was quiet for a moment. "She wasn't angry," she said. "That's the thing. I expected angry. I think I would have known what to do with angry." She turned the rings on her right hand, a habit she had when she was working through something. She looked like she was trying to understand something she hadn't been expecting to need to understand. "That might be better," Logan said, "or harder." She glanced at him. "With anger, you just wait it out. With genuine confusion, you have to explain yourself." He pulled out of the parking lot and onto the street. The city moved past the windows in its Saturday night version. Restaurants still busy, sidewalks still populated, the particular energy of a place that had no idea what kind of evening any specific person was having. "Are you going to call her?" he asked. "Tomorrow," Emma said. "Tonight I'm too—" She stopped, searched. "I'm too many things to call her tonight." He understood that. He also understood, though he didn't say it, that the conversation with Diane Carter was going to require Emma to articulate things she'd only just said out loud for the first time. And articulating them to her mother was a different operation than saying them in a hallway to him. It would take something out of her. He could already see the shape of it. They rode in silence for a few blocks. Then Emma turned in the passenger seat to face him more fully, the way she did when she wanted to say something directly rather than sideways. "Grant wasn't wrong about everything," she said. Logan glanced at her, waited. "He was wrong about what it meant," she said. "But the thing he said, about you being available, being reliable, being the one I go to." She paused. "That part was accurate. You are those things. I just—" She exhaled. "I need you to know that it was never because you were the convenient option. It was because you were the one I actually wanted. He kept his eyes on the road. There was a traffic light ahead going red, and he slowed for it, and in the stopped silence he said, "I know that now." "Did you know it before?" she asked. He considered lying. The honest answer was more complicated. "I knew it some of the time," he said, and then I'd hear something like what he said at brunch, the reliable one, the support system, and I'd wonder if I'd been reading it wrong. He paused. It's easier to doubt yourself when someone else is very confident about their version. That's what he does," Emma said. "He makes his version sound like the only reasonable interpretation." She was quiet for a moment. "I hate that he got in your head." "He didn't get in my head," Logan said. Then honestly, he found something that was already there. She looked at him. He felt the look even though he was watching the light turn green. "What was already there?" she said. He pulled forward, chose the words carefully, the way he chose numbers when the calculation mattered. "I've spent 2 years being the most stable thing in a situation that wasn't always stable," he said. "For Mia, after Rachel. Getting everything to a place where it worked." He paused. "And somewhere in there I started confusing stability for the whole thing, like being dependable was the ceiling instead of just the floor." "It's not the ceiling," Emma said. "I know." He glanced at her. "You make it harder to pretend it is." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mia's not a complication, Logan, in case that's also something that was already in your head." He hadn't said it was, but she was right that it had been there, in one form or another. The worry that wanting something for himself was somehow in competition with what Mia needed, that the math of a single father's life didn't have room for the other thing. "She asked me last week if you were going to have dinner with us again," he said. She was very specific about it. She said, and I'm quoting, "Emma should eat dinner. She probably forgets." Emma made a sound that was entirely genuine, something between a laugh and something more. She's not wrong, actually." "She's 3 and she has your number," Logan said. The building on Lillian was visible ahead. He pulled into the garage and killed the engine, and they sat in the familiar specific quiet of a car after an engine stops, when the world outside continues and the space inside goes still. "I need to ask you something," Emma said. "Okay." She was looking forward at the concrete pillar in front of the truck. "What happens now?" She said it carefully, like she was aware of how much was riding on how it was answered. "I don't want to—" She stopped, started again. "I don't want to say something in a hallway and have it just float there. I don't want this to be a thing that happened and then we spend 3 weeks not knowing what to do with it." He understood the fear underneath that. He'd lived a version of it himself. Something said, something real, and then the terrible ambiguity of what it costs if it goes wrong. "We figure it out," he said. "Not tonight necessarily, but we don't pretend it didn't happen." "That's not very specific," she said. "No," he agreed. "I'm a visual person," she said. "I work better with specifics." He turned to face her. She was looking at him now, the garage light catching the side of her face, the ivory dress slightly wrinkled from a long evening, the hair that had started the night arranged now less so. She looked tired and clear-eyed and nothing like the version of herself she'd assembled for the Whitmore family. She looked exactly like herself. "Specifically," he said, "I'd like to take you to dinner, not a family brunch, not someone else's engagement party." He paused. "Dinner. Somewhere we both choose. Where the point is just us." She held his gaze. "That's more specific." "I can be more specific when it matters," he said. Something moved across her face, not quite a smile, but the territory adjacent to one. "Okay," she said. "Dinner. Somewhere we both choose." "Yeah." She nodded slowly. "Okay," she said again, the way she'd said it that first night when he'd told her she could stay. They got out of the truck, rode the elevator to 4. The hallway received them the way it always did. The soft light, the 2 doors, the 12 feet of carpet that had been the geography of their whole friendship. At her door, Emma put her key in the lock and then turned. "Logan," she said. "Yeah." She looked at him across the narrow distance. "Thank you," she said. "Not just for tonight. For all of it. The Tuesday she came home from the date, the soup you left outside my door, every time you showed up without making it a production." He looked at her. "You don't have to thank me for that." I know I don't have to, she said. I want to. He nodded. She turned her key, pushed the door open, and paused in the frame. Good night, she said. Good night, Emma. She went inside. He stood in the hallway for a moment, not because he had something else to do, but because he needed a second. His hand went to the back of his neck, a habit, something to do when too much had happened to process standing up. He looked at her closed door for a moment, then at the floor. Then he went inside. The apartment was quiet and dark and exactly the same as it always was. Mia's drawings on the refrigerator, the couch with the slight depression on the left cushion where he always sat, the monitor on the kitchen counter, Mia's breathing slow and even on the audio, his whole ordinary life, unchanged, except that something in it had shifted. Not broken, not replaced, shifted. The way a room looks different at a different time of day, the same objects in the same places, but the light coming from somewhere new. He went to the kitchen and drank a glass of water. He thought about Grant and the specific weariness of watching someone deploy polish as a substitute for honesty, and how much energy it must require to maintain that at scale. He thought about Emma's face when she'd said, "You're the one I choose," and how different a person looks when they're saying something true versus when they're saying something careful. He thought about Mia, who would wake up tomorrow morning and have no idea that any of this had happened, and would need breakfast and would probably have opinions about it, and was the best thing he'd done and the best reason he'd had for 2 years to be the most stable version of himself, and how, it turned out, being that hadn't made him less. It had just been the foundation, the load-bearing structure underneath everything else. He went to bed. He was asleep before 11, which had not happened on a Saturday in longer than he could recall. In the morning, Mia woke him at 6:20 with her standard announcement. "Daddy?" she said at the doorway, the elephant in her hand. "It's morning." "I know, Bug. Is Emma having breakfast with us?" He looked at his daughter, her catastrophic hair, her fleece pajamas, her complete conviction that this was a reasonable question for 6:20 on a Sunday morning. "Not today," he said. "Tomorrow?" "Maybe." Mia considered this with the seriousness she brought to most negotiations. "Okay," she said, "but she should eat breakfast. She probably forgets." "You've mentioned that," he said. She turned and padded back down the hallway toward the kitchen, where she would wait for him to make the coffee she didn't drink while narrating her plans for the morning, which would be elaborate and only partially connected to what actually happened. Logan lay there for another minute, looking at the ceiling, the fan turning slow. He was not a man who experienced happiness as a loud thing. It came in quieter forms, Mia asleep, work done well, a problem solved cleanly. It came in the particular satisfaction of a structure standing the way it was supposed to stand. This morning it came in the knowledge that something he'd been carrying carefully for months, the weight of a feeling he'd been deliberately not putting down anywhere, had been set down. Finally. In a hallway off a party. In a garage on Lillian Avenue. In a conversation that wasn't finished yet but had, for the first time, actually started. He got up. He went to the kitchen to make the coffee. Outside the east-facing windows, the morning light was doing what it always did in this apartment, coming in at an angle that made even ordinary days feel, briefly, like something worth the effort. Emma called her mother on Sunday afternoon. Logan knew because he could hear through the shared wall between their apartments the specific quality of Emma's voice when she was having a conversation that required everything she had. Not the words, just the cadence, the long pauses, the occasional silence that meant someone on the other end was talking at length. He didn't listen. He took Mia to the small park 2 blocks over and pushed her on the swings for 45 minutes while she issued instructions about swing height with the precision of an air traffic controller, and by the time they got back, the wall was quiet. Emma texted at 4:17. "Talked to my mom." It was long. "You around later?" He texted back, "Yeah, come over whenever." She came at 6 after Mia's dinner while Mia was in the living room conducting some elaborate narrative with her stuffed animals that required significant concentration. Emma sat at the kitchen table and Logan put coffee on without asking, and she sat with her hands around the mug for a moment before she said anything. "She cried," Emma said. He sat down across from her, waited. "Not angry crying," Emma said. "The other kind. The kind that's harder to sit with." She looked at the table. She said she didn't realize she'd been making me feel like I wasn't enough as I was. She said she thought she was helping. Did you believe her? Yeah. Emma exhaled. That's the thing. I do believe her. She wasn't trying to diminish me. She was scared. She has this picture in her head of what a safe life for me looks like, and it involves a certain kind of man and a certain kind of stability, and she's been trying to steer me toward it because she loves me, and she doesn't know how to love me without steering. What did you say to that? Emma wrapped both hands around the mug. I said I understood, and then I said it still caused damage, even if it wasn't intended. She looked up. She didn't love hearing that, but she didn't argue with it either. Logan nodded. She asked about you, Emma said. He raised an eyebrow. What did she ask? She asked who you were to me. Emma said it evenly, but there was something working underneath it. Not like Grant asked it, not as a challenge or a reframing. She just asked, genuinely. What did you tell her? Emma looked at him across the kitchen table. In the living room, one of Mia's stuffed animals appeared to be on trial for something. Mia's voice was going through the particular register she used for serious deliberation. I told her you were the person I wanted to be with, Emma said, and that I'd known it for a while and had been slow about saying it. Logan held her gaze. How'd she take that? Emma was quiet for a moment. She said she hoped she'd get to know you properly. A pause. And then she said Mia sounded lovely, which means she'd been listening to me talk about Mia for months and had been categorizing it under Emma's neighbor's kid and was now recategorizing it. She almost smiled. My mother recategorizes things quietly and then acts like she'd always understood them that way. It's a skill. My mother's already halfway to planning something, Logan said. I can feel it from across the city. Emma laughed, the real one. It filled the kitchen and briefly interrupted whatever judicial proceedings were happening in the living room because Mia appeared in the doorway to assess the source of the noise and then returned to her case without comment. So, Logan said. So, Emma said. Dinner, he said. You said okay to dinner. I did say that. Thursday, he said. My mother can take Mia. She's been waiting for an excuse. Emma looked at him with the expression she had when something was both exactly what she wanted and slightly terrifying. Thursday, she said. Yeah, okay. You keep saying okay, he said. It's a good word, she said. It covers a lot of ground. Thursday came the way important things do, preceded by ordinary days that were somehow both too long and too short. Logan worked, picked up Mia, made dinner, read books, maintained the structure of the life he'd built, all of it exactly as it had been. Except that Emma knocked on Tuesday evening with a question about a lens she was thinking of buying, and they talked for an hour and a half about things that were adjacent to the question and never quite returned to it. And when she left, he stood in his doorway for a second, watching her cross the hall, and she turned at her door and caught him watching, and neither of them made it awkward, which was either a good sign or they were both too tired for awkward, and probably both. His mother picked Mia up at 5:30 on Thursday with the energy of someone who had been given a gift. You look nice, his mother said, with a meaningful pause before and after nice that contained approximately 3 separate conversations he wasn't having with her tonight. Thanks, Mom. Emma? Mom. I'm just asking. You're not just asking, he said. You're doing the thing where you ask something that's actually 7 other things. Ruth Brooks had the expression of a woman who had been accurately identified and was choosing not to confirm it. Have a good dinner, she said. Thank you for taking Mia. She's my granddaughter. It's not a favor. She buckled Mia into the back seat. It's the second best part of my week. What's the first? Book club, she said, without hesitation. We're doing a thriller this month. Someone gets pushed off a boat. She pulled out of the parking garage with the satisfaction of a woman who had everything she needed for the evening. Logan went upstairs and changed his shirt twice, which he would not be telling Derek. The restaurant was Emma's choice, a small Italian place on Woodland Street. Nothing elaborate, the kind of place with maybe 15 tables and handwritten specials on a chalkboard and wine poured without ceremony. They'd walked past it once together, months ago, and Emma had said it looked like the kind of place where people had real conversations, which at the time Logan had filed under things she said that he liked. He was there before her. He sat at the table the host led him to and looked at the menu without reading it and tried to locate his own internal weather, which was something he was not generally in the habit of checking. He was nervous. He was also, underneath that, something else. The way you feel when you're about to do something you've been waiting to do for long enough that the waiting itself had become familiar. And now the thing is actually happening, and the absence of waiting is its own adjustment. Emma came in at 7:04. She was in something simple, dark jeans, a blouse the color of rust, her hair down. She looked like herself, which was what he'd hoped for, which was the whole point of this restaurant over any other kind. She sat across from him, looked at the table, the candle, the wine list. "This is weird," she said. "Yeah," he agreed. "I've sat across from you at a table probably 200 times," she said. "And now it's a thing." "It was always a thing," he said. "We just weren't calling it that." She looked up at him. Something moved through her expression. Recognition, maybe. The slight surprise of being seen accurately. "Fair," she said. They ordered wine. They ordered food. They talked, the way they always talked, easily, trailing between subjects, landing on things neither of them had planned to say. She talked about a wedding she was shooting the following weekend, a bride who had very specific and somewhat contradictory ideas about natural light. He talked about a building project downtown that was in the third revision of its structural plan because the architect kept changing the roofline without adjusting the load calculations, which was, he explained with the calm frustration of a man who had dealt with this before, like someone deciding to add a second story to a house and expecting the foundation not to notice. Emma laughed at that. "Is that a metaphor?" she said. "It's my Tuesday," he said. "It sounds like a metaphor." "Buildings and people are both load-bearing systems," he said. "That's as far as I'll take it." She pointed her fork at him. "You're more interesting than you let on, Logan Brooks." "I let on plenty," he said. "To me," she said. "Not generally." He looked at her. The candle between them, the ambient noise of other people's Thursday evenings, the chalkboard specials over her shoulder. She was right. He was more open with her than with almost anyone, and had been since early enough in their friendship that he could no longer locate the moment when it started. "You make it easy," he said. She didn't deflect it. She just looked at him and let it sit there, which was something he'd noticed about her from the beginning. She could receive a true thing without turning it into something more comfortable. "Can I say something?" she said. "Yeah." She set her fork down. "I've been thinking about why I waited so long. To say what I said at the party." She paused. "And I think it's because I was afraid of being wrong. Not about you, about myself, about whether what I felt was real or whether I was just..." She searched, running toward something comfortable because the other thing was hard. He waited. "And I realized," she said, "that I kept testing it. Every time something with Grant felt off, I'd check myself. Is this just avoidance? Am I just using Logan as an excuse not to do the work?" And the answer kept being no. It wasn't avoidance, it wasn't comfort-seeking. She looked at him steadily. It was just you. The actual you. That's what kept coming back. Logan looked at her. He was aware, in this moment, of the specific danger of this kind of honesty. The way it required you to be in it without the protection of distance or deflection. The way it made you vulnerable in a way that was not comfortable, but was the only way anything real ever got built. "I was afraid of a different thing," he said. "What?" "That I'd say something and you'd let me down easy," he said. "And then we'd have to live across the hall from each other with that in the air." He paused. "I couldn't calculate the outcome. And when I can't calculate the outcome, I tend to not act." "That sounds lonely," she said. "It was," he said. Simply, without drama. She reached across the table and put her hand on his. Not as a gesture, not building to something or pulling back from it. Just placed it there, the way she'd touched his forearm in the hallway at the party, because she'd needed to confirm something was real. "It's real," she said. He turned his hand over under hers. "Yeah," he said. "I know." They ate. They talked more. The restaurant filled and then slowly thinned as the evening moved through its hours, and they stayed at their table longer than was strictly necessary, The way you stay somewhere when the leaving would mean the night is over and you're not ready for the night to be over. When they walked home, they walked close. Not holding hands, not yet. That would come, but not tonight. Tonight was its own thing and didn't need to be rushed into the next thing. The air was the specific temperature of a Nashville late spring night, warm enough that you didn't need a jacket, but cool enough that you noticed the warmth of the person walking beside you. At Lillian Avenue, at the door of the building, Emma stopped. She turned to face him on the sidewalk. The streetlight was doing something particular to the way she looked, softening the edges, which she didn't need and he didn't require but was there anyway. "Logan," she said. "Yeah. I'm going to knock on your door tomorrow morning," she said. "Not because of an emergency, not because I need help with something, just because I want to." He looked at her. "Okay," he said. She smiled. The full version, the one that she didn't ration. "You and your okays," she said. "It covers a lot of ground," he said, and she laughed, and he held the door open, and they went upstairs. The weeks that followed were not a movie. That was the thing about real life. It doesn't resolve cleanly into a final scene. It keeps going. It accumulates. Emma knocked on his door on Friday morning, as promised, and he had coffee ready, which she called presumptuous and drank immediately. They had dinner with Mia on Saturday. Emma brought the ingredients for pasta, and Mia helped in the way 3-year-olds help, which is to say, she stirred things that didn't need stirring and provided a running commentary on the proceedings, and at one point declared that the pasta was ready when it had been in the water for 45 seconds. "It's not ready, Bug," Logan said. "I think it is," Mia said. "She has strong convictions," Emma said from the counter. "She gets that honestly," Logan said, and Emma looked at him with an expression that meant she'd caught what he meant and was filing it. They ate at the kitchen table, the three of them, and it was ordinary in the specific way that things are ordinary when they're also exactly right, when the rightness doesn't announce itself but is just present, the way temperature is present, something you'd notice most sharply if it were removed. After dinner, Mia fell asleep on the couch before 7:30, which was earlier than usual, and which Logan attributed to a very active week at preschool that had involved, according to Mia's account, a disagreement about a red crayon of such complexity that he was still not entirely sure he understood all the parties involved. He carried her to bed. Emma was in the kitchen when he came out, washing the dishes with the ease of someone who'd done it before and would again, not because she'd been asked, just because she was there and it needed doing, which was the kind of thing that made him understand more than anything else why everything Grant had said about convenience had missed the point so completely. It wasn't that Emma was in his life because it was convenient. It was that she'd made herself at home in it because she wanted to be there. Those were not remotely the same thing. He stood in the kitchen doorway and watched her for a second. She didn't notice for a moment, and then she did, turned and saw him looking. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "You have a look." "I don't have a look." "You definitely have a look." She handed him a dish to dry. "What is it?" He took the dish. "I was just thinking about something Grant said," he said. "About me always being available, like it was a character flaw. But..." Emma turned back to the sink. "It's not a flaw." "No," he agreed. "But I thought about why I am the way I am. The stability, the reliability, all of it." He dried the dish. "For a long time after Rachel, I told myself it was about Mia, that I was building the steadiest life I could so she'd have something solid to grow up in." He paused. "And that's true. But it's not all of it." Emma waited. "I also did it because it was something I could control," he said. "Everything else. What Rachel chose, what happened to the marriage, the fact that I was 30 with a 14-month-old in a half-empty apartment. I couldn't control any of that. But I could control whether the bills were paid and the food was made and someone was there when Mia needed them." He set the dish down. "Being reliable was the thing I could hold on to when the rest of it was out of my hands." Emma had stopped washing. She was looking at him. "That makes sense," she said quietly. "Yeah," he said. "It does. I needed to stop using it as the whole story." He looked at her. "I'm allowed to want things that aren't just responsibilities." She turned off the water, dried her hands on the dish towel, turned to face him fully in the kitchen, 4 feet between them. "Yes," she said, "you are." He nodded. For what it's worth, she said, you wanting things doesn't make you less stable. It makes you a person. She held his gaze. Mia has a person for a father, not a system. That's better. He looked at her for a moment. You're going to be good at this, he said. She blinked. At what? At being someone in our lives, he said. Not a role, not a category, just present. She pressed her lips together. Something moved through her face that she didn't entirely manage to contain. Don't say things like that, she said. Why? Because I'm trying to be cool about this, and you're making it very difficult, she said, which made him laugh. An actual laugh, from somewhere real. And then she was laughing too, and the kitchen was just a kitchen again, with the dishes done and Mia asleep down the hall, and the night outside the east-facing windows going quietly about its business. He crossed the 4 feet between them. She looked up at him, and the laughing had subsided to something quieter, and for a moment neither of them said anything because there wasn't anything left that needed saying before what happened next. He kissed her. It was not the first time in his imagination. But imagination doesn't account for the specific reality of a person. The way she made a small sound, not quite surprise, more like recognition. The way her hand came up to his jacket lapel, not pulling him closer, just holding. The way it felt like the least dramatic thing in the world, and also somehow like the thing every prior moment in the last 11 months had been pointing toward without either of them saying so. They pulled back. She looked at him. Finally, she said. He laughed again. She did too. Finally, he agreed. Emma's relationship with her mother didn't transform overnight. It couldn't. 20 years of dynamic doesn't become something new in 3 weeks. But something had cracked open in that phone call on Sunday, and what came through the crack was not resolution so much as honesty, which was the thing that made resolution eventually possible. Diane Carter called the following Thursday to ask if she could take Emma to lunch. Just the two of them, she said. No agenda. Emma went, with appropriate skepticism, and came home to knock on Logan's door at 3 p.m. with the specific expression of someone who has been surprised in a direction they weren't expecting. She apologized, Emma said. She was standing in the doorway, coat still on, like she hadn't fully decided whether to come in yet. Not the almost kind, the real kind. What did she say? Emma came in, sat on the couch. She said she realized she'd been trying to protect me from uncertainty by steering me toward certainty, and that she'd picked the wrong things to treat as certain. She paused. She said she thought stability meant a particular kind of man and a particular kind of life, and that she hadn't understood until recently that stability is something people build, not something you pick off a shelf. Did she mean Grant versus me? Logan said. He asked it without defensiveness, just as a clarification. Not exactly, Emma said. Or, not only. She meant herself. She said she'd built her own stability on a very narrow idea of what things were supposed to look like, and she'd been handing that idea to me as though it were a gift. She looked at her hands. She said she was sorry it took her so long to look at what I'd actually built instead of what she'd imagined. Logan sat in the armchair across from her. The afternoon light was coming through the east windows, lower now, the angle of early May. Mia was at preschool for another hour. What does that mean going forward? He said. It means we're figuring it out, Emma said. She's not going to suddenly stop having opinions. She's my mother. Opinions are what she does. She looked up at him. But she asked about you. Genuinely. She asked what you were like, what Mia was like. A pause. She asked if she could meet Mia sometime. He held her gaze. What did you say? I said I'd ask you, Emma said. He thought about his mother, Ruth Brooks with her thriller novels and her book club and her complete inability to conceal her investment in his happiness. He thought about the Sunday phone calls and the way she'd handed Mia over on Thursday with the look of someone who'd understood more than she'd been told. He thought about how families are just collections of people who've agreed to try to love each other, and how that agreement doesn't come with a manual, and how almost everyone is doing it with incomplete information and the best judgment they have on hand. Yeah, he said, we can arrange that. Emma's shoulders dropped slightly, a release she probably didn't know she was carrying. My dad called too, she said. He said, and I'm quoting, I hear you've sorted some things out. Good for you, kid. She smiled. That's about as extended as my dad gets. I like your dad, Logan said. He'll like you, Emma said. He said anyone who can make soup and raise a child deserves the benefit of the doubt. She paused. I think the soup thing has genuinely become a cornerstone of my family's opinion of you. I'll take it, Logan said. She leaned back into the couch cushions. The coat finally came off. She looked at the ceiling for a moment, then at him. I feel like something is still settling, she said, like the ground hasn't completely stopped moving yet. That's okay, he said. Ground takes time. Is that an engineering thing? It's a true thing, he said. Foundations settle after they're poured. It's normal. It doesn't mean something's wrong. She looked at him with the expression she had when she found him genuinely funny. You can't help it, she said. Not really, he agreed. In the weeks that followed, they built something. Not quickly, not without awkwardness. There was the specific strangeness of transitioning from neighbors who were close friends to people who were something more. The renegotiation of 1,000 small habits and assumptions, the occasional moment where the old distance was easier to fall back into than the new closeness. They were imperfect at it. Emma was better at saying things than at letting herself be cared for without deflecting. Logan was better at showing up than at saying out loud what showing up meant. They had one actual argument about something that was on the surface about scheduling and was actually about the fear of asking for too much. And they both knew it was about the fear of asking for too much. And they said so eventually, which was uncomfortable and also the only way through it. Mia remained entirely Mia. She accepted Emma's increasing presence with the equanimity of someone who had always found the world roughly as it should be and saw no reason to reassess. She called her by name, included her in the jurisdiction of her stuffed animal narratives, and one Saturday morning brought her a drawing that was labeled, in Mia's emphatic block letters, Emma. The drawing itself was ambiguous in subject matter. It could have been a person or possibly a tree with arms, but Emma received it with the seriousness it deserved and put it on her own refrigerator, next to a shot she'd taken at a wedding the previous month that had won her a regional photography award. She told Logan about the award in passing, not as an announcement. She mentioned it because he'd asked how the submission went, and she answered honestly, and the honesty happened to be that she'd won. Emma, he said, it's a regional thing. Emma, she stopped. That's not a small thing, he said. She looked at him. It's, do not shrink it, he said. Don't do the thing where you make it smaller so it's easier to hold. She was quiet for a moment. He watched her sit with that. The instruction not to manage it down to a more comfortable size, to just let it be what it was. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. She smiled. We do that a lot. It's a good word, he said. You told me it covers a lot of ground. The photography business grew through the spring. She took on 2 new clients on the editorial side, work she'd been hesitant to pursue at scale because it required blocking weekends, and she'd been unconsciously keeping her schedule flexible in ways she was only now recognizing were tied to the old dynamic, the sense that her time was negotiable when other people's needs were pressing. She stopped doing that. She blocked the weekends she needed. She raised her rates, something she'd been told to do by everyone who knew her work and had been delaying without a reason she could clearly articulate, and discovered, as people usually do when they raise their rates, that the clients who mattered stayed, and the clients who'd been treating her as a discount service found other options. Logan watched this happen with the satisfaction of someone seeing a load-bearing structure settle into its correct position. He didn't say much about it. Emma didn't need commentary. She needed room. But she knew he was watching, and that mattered in the way that being witnessed by the right person matters. His own life continued in its shape, adjusted. He still woke at 6:15. He still made coffee and listened to Mia's morning narrations. He still did the work that required precision and patience and the particular satisfaction of a problem solved in the terms the problem had set. He still called his mother on Sundays. He still texted Derek memes at irregular hours. But the apartment felt different now. Not physically. The same curtain rod he'd been meaning to replace. The same east-facing windows. The same slight depression in the left couch cushion. But the quality of the evenings had changed. The specific weight of the nighttime silence had changed. It wasn't that Emma was always there. She had her own apartment, her own space. They were careful about that, about not collapsing the distance between them so fast that neither of them had room to breathe. But the silence was different when it was elected rather than the only available option. One evening in late May, a Tuesday, because it had started on a Tuesday, Logan was on the couch after Mia went to bed, a book open on his knee that he wasn't reading, when his phone buzzed. "Emma, can I come over?" He looked at the text. He thought about 11 months ago, the first time she'd knocked on this door. The dress, the mascara, the clutch purse held in both hands, asking if she could stay because she didn't want to be in her own apartment. How much he hadn't understood yet about what it meant that she'd come here instead of anywhere else. Logan. Yeah. Doors open. She came in 2 minutes later in what were clearly pajamas, the oversized shirt and the fleece pants that she'd started keeping at his place because it was easier, which had been a negotiation neither of them had explicitly had, but which had resolved itself through repeated practical logic. She had her own coffee mug now in his cabinet. This had also happened gradually and without announcement, and was, he'd decided, one of the better developments of the spring. She sat beside him on the couch, not in the armchair where she used to sit, beside him in the space that had become hers by accumulation. "Good day or bad day?" he asked. "Medium," she said. "The good kind of medium. Nothing wrong, just full." She looked at the open book on his knee. "What are you reading?" "I haven't gotten very far," he admitted. "Why?" "I was thinking." "About what?" He considered it. The book. The couch. The monitor on the kitchen counter. Mia's breathing even and slow. Emma beside him in her pajamas. No performance, no management, just herself in his living room on a Tuesday night. "About how different everything looks from inside it versus from the outside," he said. She looked at him. "What do you mean?" "From the outside," he said, "this is a pretty ordinary Tuesday. Man on couch, bookies not reading, kid asleep." He paused. "From the inside, it's completely different from what any Tuesday looked like a year ago." Emma was quiet for a moment. She tucked her feet under her on the couch, the way she did when she was settling in. "Better or worse?" she said. She said it lightly, like she wasn't entirely sure she needed the answer. "Better," he said, without qualification. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He put the book on the coffee table. Outside, East Nashville was doing its late evening thing. Traffic on Gallatin tapering off, the building settling into its nighttime sounds, the particular quiet of a spring night through windows that were cracked just enough to let the air through. This was not the version of his life he'd planned, but then the life he'd planned hadn't made it. It had ended in a hollow apartment in Germantown, and a 14-month-old in a car seat, and a drive across the city to a building on Lillian Avenue where the rent was manageable, and a photography teacher 2 years younger than him had moved into the apartment across the hall and talked to him for 40 minutes in a room full of boxes about what it means to build something real. There are things in life you can calculate and things you can't. Logan had spent a long time believing that the things you couldn't calculate were the ones to protect yourself from. He'd been wrong about that. The uncalculable things were not the dangerous things. They were just the ones that required you to show up without knowing the outcome, and show up anyway, and trust the structure to hold. It held. Mia was 3 years old and had strong opinions about pasta timing and drew pictures labeled cat of things that did not resemble cats, and had told him on a Thursday morning 2 weeks ago with the absolute conviction of someone delivering settled truth. "Emma is our Emma now, Daddy." Logan had looked at his daughter across the breakfast table and said, "Yeah, Bug, she is." And Mia had gone back to her cereal as though the matter had been open and was now closed, which in her view it probably had been and was. He thought about what it takes to love someone, not the feeling. Feelings are easy, feelings arrive without being invited. But the decision beneath the feeling, the daily chosen thing, the willingness to be known by someone, actually known, not the version of yourself you've curated or the role you've assigned yourself, and to know them back in all the ways that means, including the ways that are inconvenient. He thought about Emma's hand on the table at the restaurant, her voice in the corridor at the party. The Tuesday night she knocked on his door in a dress that had been chosen to impress people she didn't like, and stood in his hallway and asked if she could stay. He thought about the 12 feet between their two doors, how it had taken 11 months and 2 separate family events, and a man named Grant Whitmore, and one honest conversation in a parking garage to understand that 12 feet was not a distance. It was a choice, made and remade every day, to be close to someone rather than safe. Safety, he'd learned, was overrated as an endpoint. It was a good foundation, yes. It was necessary. You built on it, not toward it. You built toward this: a Tuesday night, a couch, a book he wasn't reading, and a woman leaning her head on his shoulder while the city went about its business outside the east-facing windows of a third-floor apartment in East Nashville, where 2 years ago everything had fallen apart and something better had been, quietly, being constructed ever since. He'd thought, when Rachel left, that he was starting over. He hadn't been starting over. He'd been starting. The building was still going up. The load-bearing walls were in. The foundation had settled. Whatever came next would be built on something real. Not the idea of stability, not the performance of it, but the actual thing, tested and true. Beside him, Emma's breathing slowed. She wasn't asleep, just resting. He could tell the difference. Outside, a car passed on Gallatin. Inside, the monitor carried the soft rhythm of Mia's sleep. The apartment was exactly itself, imperfect, lived in, accumulated, and Logan Brooks was exactly where he was supposed to be. Not because it was safe, because he'd chosen it, and because for the first time in a long time, the choosing was enough.